Welcome everyone back to Forward Operating Base Lake Fork. I am Greg Hill. I am your host of your fishing show today. This is a special edition show, kind of just for doing the a report for the Sealy Big Bass Splash that's coming up this weekend. You know, it's one of my favorite things. It was one of my favorite tournaments because it's the thing that brought me here to the lake. And you know, I'm getting my partners coming in from over 20 years ago. We fished this, and I can't fish it anymore because of the, you know, because I guide out here now. But look, it's a cost of doing business. But I really wish I could fish it, and I really miss fishing it. I'm jealous of you guys getting to fish it. So I'm going to try to lay out for the people who are just coming here, you know, what you're seeing on the water temperatures, water clarity in different parts of the lake, some of the cover that you're seeing, and you know, look, some of the techniques that I've been using. And you know, depending on what you want to do, you know, either trying to catch that big fish, that big kahuna, you know, over 24 inches and try to win the tournament itself, or trying to fish that biggest fish under 16 inches, trying to get some money, try to pay for that gas, try to pay for the entry fee. I know how it goes. I mean, this is probably the biggest opportunity. It's almost like a lottery ticket that you don't have to pick as many numbers, you know, because look, there's a lot fewer people playing this lottery than they play the big lottery, right? So you know, it's a good use of your money. It's a good way to sell it to the wife, right? So just go ahead and come on out and fish a tournament, you know, and I think it's a great time, and it's great to have a little competition in your life. But I'm gonna get right back into the water, and we'll talk about it. Okay, so the water, let's talk about first the water temperatures. So the water's generally been cooling down. We're having cooler nights now. You know, fall is starting to happen around here. You got some leaves falling off some of the trees. You know, as it's in nighttime when the water's cooling off in a lot of these coves, the minnows that live back here in the coves, I'm not talking about the big schools of them that move around, but the ones that live back here, they're all coming up the top and they're flickering everywhere. It's like there's a minnow in every square foot of this cove that I'm in, right when it gets evening time. There are some schools in the mouth coming back in here, but back in the back right now, they're mostly, it seems like it's just the resident minnows living back in here, not as much as the big schools of them. But let's talk about the water quality, or the water temperature. So the water temperature is sitting like 83 degrees. It's sitting back here, you know, but we're seeing the 91, 92s, you know, before the cool weather's kind of started in there. And you know, it's afternoon now. It's 4:15 in the afternoon. We've had cloud cover today, so you know, it hasn't got as much sun, but still sitting at about 83 degrees. There's definitely a cooling off. And that brings my next point, water clarity. So I said in my fish report Sunday that I didn't think that real turnover was taking place, even though I had some questions about it. But now, after a couple days of really getting around the lake and looking around, I know that in some places of the lake, turnover has started. There are places in the lake where that mucky grass on the bottom is floated at the top. It's kind of switched over a little bit. And like in here, the water quality has gotten it's pretty green in here. You only got about maybe a foot and a quarter here right now. And that's compared to other parts on the main lake where you can still have a pretty good visibility in some of the places. So it just depends on, you know, what does that do? Well, back in these places the water clarity is not as good. Back in the backs of these coves, back in this brush and things like that, they're down in here. You know, you got to use some brighter colors probably, you know, either really dark or really bright. Using those kind of greenish colors in those areas might not work as well because it's going to mix in with the water color. You're going to have something that stands out a little bit. If you're out in the areas where you have some clear water, then you can get into some of those other more natural colors. You can get into, you know, the magic, you know, watermelon candies and things like that. So, okay, so talk about water quality and the water visibility. You go way back in some of the grass. There's a lot of grass in some places. In the back of these coves, it seems to be decomposing in a lot of places still. And man, it's just the water's gotten pretty mucky in some of those places. So you're going to have to do some scouting around to kind of find out what you're going to do. And then, so let's talk. We talked about the temperature. We talked about the water clarities. Now let's talk about just the elevation of the water. So we're down almost 1.5 feet right now. It'll be 1.5 feet by time Sunday has. It doesn't look like we're getting any rain. I checked on the radar just about 15 minutes ago. Doesn't seem to be any rain that's going to make it up here. It kind of stops south of here. So it looks like for the next couple days you are set with the water that we have. You're not going to get this big rush of rain. I was hoping we would get some rain, bring some cooler water in the back of these coves, and maybe have some more of the fish pull back and even more fish pull back in shallow, but I just don't see it happening right now. So, you know, I guess it could if the weather changes, maybe it can. But it looks like we're set with this water that we've got right now for the next, you know, week or so. The wind is kicked up today. so that will churn the water up a little bit too. So that's something messing with the water clarity in a couple places also. But okay, let's talk about your fishing. So look, like I said, you're either going for the big fish over 24 inches or you're going for the under. So let's talk about strategies of going for the big fish. Look, big fish are being caught right now between 4 feet and 22 feet. In the mornings, shallow. In the mornings, topwater baits. You can throw I don't have one of the big ones out, but the bigger version of the head and spooks. Something that's walking the dog. Cream colors or the shad colors. You just have to kind of mix it up. I had a buddy who caught a really nice one, I guess, out maybe 4 days ago on the topwater, first water on the point, and first couple casts in there and smashed it. So I was on a point just 2 mornings ago where I had schools of 5 to 6 inch gitter shad being chased out of the water, and that was in 5 to 6 feet of water. And I was throwing with a lipless crankbait, and I didn't get anything on it, but they were there, so I just didn't either get it across in front of the fish close enough or not. The water clarity wasn't perfect there, so you need a little bit of vibration to kind of the fish could see it. So so bigger fish, bigger lures, really, can you catch a big fish on a small lure? Of course you can, but for the most part, I'm throwing bigger lure trying to catch bigger fish. Usually when I'm fishing my clients, I'm trying to catch bigger fish. I'm not really usually catching unders, so I'm out here throwing big baits. So what I consider big bait, big 10-inch, 12-inch worms. The colors, you said I'm calling like a plum red versus this green pumpkin with the magic colors in it. So you can mix those up. The darker colors, even the dark purple color on the big worms. One of my really favorite colors here in the last week, though, in the areas where you've got some better visibility in the water, is this a big 12-inch long red worm. It's got a bloodline in it, and I really like that. Maybe something fish they don't see too much. It's kind of it's a color they like, but it's got just a little variation to it, so maybe they're liking it. So what am I doing? Well, throwing in the morning. You can throw up shallow. Shallow is 4 feet to 10 feet, I think, in the morning right now. I just caught them yesterday morning on brush piles, wood, not like a brush pile, more like a log jam in 10 feet of water on a point, on a secondary point. The fish were there, there's 5 or 6 of them sitting in there, and I could see them when I went by my side imaging, and then turned around and saw them, and then flipped in there right away and got bit right. Actually, I got broke off right away, and that's one of the things. If you're fishing with these light line lures, and I was fishing with this little red worm that I'll talk about later, I was fishing that, and I got broke off. I got broke off 2 times a day previously, doing the same thing. So there are some bigger fish down here biting these little lures, but I'd have to go back with some heavier line maybe to catch them, because they're in the brush piles and they're breaking me off. You catch a big fish in a brush pile, he's going to get away. Unless you can just immediately pull him out of there, he's going to get the line wrapped on something. So if you're sitting with 12 to 15 pound line on something, it's too light. So you have to really kind of think about your light lines of what you're doing. A lot of people like to drop shot with those things, but if you're trying to do that big fish, look, if I was drop shotting for a big bass, I would drop shot a big weight and a big worm and throw that down just to get that rise off the bottom as you're working it through there. It's the same thing. So look, I'm Texas rigging these worms. I am shaky head. I'm doing a plain shaky head and a football shaky head, so I've done both. I don't really know the difference between those two. I haven't really thrown one and the other. Have client one throwing one, the other and see who's catching it, because we were just kind of usually throwing both at the same, and then I kind of just mixed them up, and I never really saw anywhere it would be any kind of some preference for one or the other. So another good thing for I think the bigger baits are these bigger trick worms. And again, I got this green pumpkin reds, throwing them on little wacky rigging. A trick worm is a pretty good presentation. It's something the fish don't see very much, and you can work it at multiple depths and work it with just a little wacky head that's got some kind of weed guard on it, so you can make sure not to get stuck up too much. So big spoons, look, flutter spoons, the 8-inch variety, the big ones, they catch big fish. You have to learn how to fish it, and you know, maybe it's a show for later on, but you basically need to use to throw that spoon, make it flutter down, don't let it fall straight down, get those fish to chase it. If you can get more than one being competing for it, then they'll hit it. So that's what I see mostly. Big crankbaits, you know, 10XDs, still on some of these big offshore humps in those areas. So the offshore fishing or secondary point-ish fishing, shell bed type things, I think that's probably where the big fish could come from. Or it could come from the shallow water, top water bite in the morning. That's, you know, kind of what I'm thinking. Big swim baits, you know, like a Lake Fork swim bait, you know, broke through these a grassy area, just slow push through. This is just a Lake Fork little swim bait with a hook in it. You just let it sink down and just pull it through the grass a little slow. It can't get hooked up, it'll pull through that stuff. Another big bass bait that I like this type of year is just a good old-fashioned swim jig. Just a jig, swim head, kind of a pointy head on it, and you know, just a big white or chartreuse, you know, colored kicker tail on it. So I haven't seen anybody throwing like big swim baits, the big ones, but I guess people could. Big fish, big bite, right? So I agree with that. And then there are places on the lake where there are a lot of lily pads and really thick grass. You could go punch through that in some places. You know, this is a big, you know, 1 ounce lead, you know, 1 ounce of titanium head on a big tube bait. You can put it through those that lily pads of the grass and have it punch down through there. So it could be doing that pretty much all times of the day. Depends on the weather we get, you know. I mean, we're not going to get any rain, it doesn't look like, so mostly just wind and some clouds that take place over time. If we get the clouds, I like it. If we get the sun, I like it. It just depends on where you can focus. And then one last thing that, you know, really can catch us some good fish here on Lake Fork are chatterbaits. You know, this is a Lake Fork trailer. It's just I got this in like that dark color. You see that color right there? That's the color of these minnows that are swimming around back in here, and kind of the bluegill. So you're getting maybe a double whammy on what the possibility of that in. Okay, so I've talked about the big fish, you know, bite, I think. And so now let's talk about the small fish bite. And this is probably a subject that a lot of people have a lot of. No, I didn't mention spinnerbaits. But spinnerbaits, you know, this time of year, getting into the fall, spinnerbait's a good bait again. So, you know, I don't fish as much. And again, when we get into the fall, I start fishing again. I like the white chartreuse colors right now. I like to move the bait and see if they'll hit it there. So, but you can fish those deep. My partner's coming here. You know, I made him fish out in 21 feet of water in the middle of Lake Fork during this tournament 21 years ago. And like the second cast, he caught a huge 6-pound bass on a big ledge buster spinnerbait, those old ledge busters, and I still have some of those. So there are big fish down deep. That fish wasn't big enough, but there are fish down there. And matter of fact, that was the same place I've caught some fish later on now on these big spoons. I can go down there and target them specifically with a lot of my Garmin live scope system. So I know they're there. They were there 20 years ago, and they're there now. So it's the same thing. Okay, so let's talk about unders. I think I've talked about most of what I would do for the overs. And then jigs. I didn't talk about the jigs, but you know, you can always drag jigs on those offshore spots. Big jigs, 1 ounce, 3/4 ounce, 1 ounce jigs. Throw them down there, drag them, hop them. You know, mix it up a little bit, make it hop, shoot off the bottom, look like it's something fleeing. Get a reaction by Adam, and then try dragging it, one of those two. Okay, so let's finally talk about the smaller fish. Okay, you know, I'm sorry. You know, I talked about these trick worms. I didn't talk about, you know, one of the other ways to throw it. So I like the trick worms float, and I've got a rig right here that's been successful for about a month and a half now. I'll start throwing it. It's a mini Carolina rig. You know, it's like the old days when we had like a little split shot rig. It's about maybe 14-15 inches of line on a leader. On this, I've got a red weight, and I've got a small 6-inch trick worm with a 1/0, you know, little thin worm. Now that's been a good bait for me. It's caught a lot of fish. It's catches big fish and small fish. That's the one I keep getting broken off on some big fish though. I've got to go back and throw my big worm in there and get bit, and then I can usually land it because I got 20-pound line on the big one, so it makes it. But okay, so the small ones. Look, you downsize your lures. Downsize what you're looking for. These fish can be in the same places. Those big fish, offshore brush piles. Offshore points, shell beds, things like that. some humps. The smaller fish are going to be kind of in the same areas. They'll get in the trees. They'll be in these trees. You can pull them out of the trees. You can pull them, shallower up here in the grassy areas. But the question is, you got to find that one. I mean, face it, you're looking for a football fish. You're looking for a Florida strain fish that is, heavy but under 16 inches. So where are you going to find that Florida strain fish? Well, unfortunately, they're kind of mixed up all the way. I think more of the football fish seem to be in the grassy areas than out there in the main lake. Maybe that's because Florida strains are usually, like shallower water and live in Florida, and they like living in the grass. Maybe that's the case. But I tend to caught most of my longer, skinnier fish out in the main lake, and my footballish fish in the grassier areas, if that makes sense. So look, again, drop shotting for the smaller fish. You can't go wrong drop shotting the small finesse worms like this for those smaller fish. You probably can't go wrong just throwing, now imagine this kicker swim bait without the jig on it, and just thrown with a tiny weight on it. Just enough weight with a normal 3/0, 4/0 hook to give enough weight to sink down a water column and swim that thing through the water. You can work it pretty slow. You can swim it through the column. You can mix up the colors for it, make up the size. It can be a 4-inch or a 3-inch, something like that. There's a lot of morning bite going on shallow from these smaller fish, it seems like, in these grassy areas. And those swim baits like that, rigged properly for the right buoyancy. You have to play with the line. It depends on the line you got, depends on how much weight you got, how big the lure is. You have to adjust it, because you don't want it falling real fast. You want it to kind of sink down, but you don't want it, when you reel it up, you don't want it to rise up all the way to the surface. You want it to stay under the surface. But if you really want to reel it in faster and make it and kick the tail, you can do that. But that's not what you want to do when it's just sitting there. You want to be able to hit the water and sink down out of the water and do it. A buddy of mine used to throw those swim tail Senkos, and kind of did that. That was the first time I actually had seen that. Green with white, colors with it. You can work it right through the grass and get stuck. You can make them like just bounce off that grass and swim through on the bass. And I just love sitting those, grabbing those things. So that's something I would be doing. So look, this is a tiny little storm, just kicktail. I use it on on the small Alabama rig. And I'm sorry, I didn't mention the Alabama rig for fishing, but Alabama rigs have caught some big fish for me. So I haven't. I've only got one over on it, but not anything that's. It wasn't. I think the biggest one was 9.6. But hey, 8.8 and 8.8 won the tournament last year. So could it produce this year? The big Alabama rigs? I think it could. Let me go back to the smaller ones, but these are some of the smaller ones I use, and I'll make a mini Alabama rig and put these tiny little things on there and throw that out there and run that through some of these smaller schools trying to get a bite of those. They sell both the junior and the big Alabama rigs, so you can kind of play around with those. And you can just throw that by itself. You can throw it as a little swim bait in some of these deeper areas where there's not a lot to get hung up on, and do it that way. But let's start shallow in the morning. Let's talk about square bill crankbaits. And you can throw the different sizes. You got fat bodies, you got smaller, slimmer profiles. You just kind of mix it up. Depends, I think, where the water is. If you're really water clarity that is not great, you need to have something that moves a little bit more water, has a little shake to it, and then it'll push more water for you. If you're in one of those areas where it's pretty clear and you're not, maybe 5-6 feet deep, go with that flat side bait. This doesn't even have a rattle in it, so it's not in your face. So think about those. The rattle traps. Look, smaller rattle traps. Great bait here on Lake Fork to throw from some smaller fish. It's a great search bait, and it's a reaction bait. The fall pattern's happening. The fish are starting to chase this shad all over the place. I'm seeing it all kinds of places now. And if you can cover the water and get into one or two of them, you might catch a couple real quick on there. There still are some schools running around. Look, drop shotting I talked about though. The other thing was just Texas rigs. Texas rigs, some of these smaller worms. June bugs, red shad colors, either back in the grass or in the wood. But I've been focusing my fishing on this trying to catch the smaller ones on some of the shallow water brush piles. And when I say shallow, 8 feet to 10 feet or so is what I've been trying to do. And you know, I got broke up by a couple, and the biggest one I caught the other day was about 1.75 pounds. Yeah, so it really wasn't a perfect candidate. So I wouldn't say right now I'm not. I mean, in the last 2 days, I haven't caught the perfect fish. I haven't caught the perfect 2.5 pounder just under 16 inches. So I don't know if I can say exactly where it is right now, but you know, I think I'm close to some of the areas I know there's fish there. But I know the techniques that are going to probably pay for you. Again, morning bites, crankbaits, chatterbaits, lipless crankbaits, the swim tail kicker, like they're almost like a kicker Senko, but a kicker, you know, swim bait without that big jig head on it. Throw them back into some of these grassy areas. Frogs, you know, the frog bite is happening. Somebody's caught some big fish on the frog. Generally speaking, though, I mean, you have to throw a pretty frog to get that 2.5 pounder. You know, 2.5 pounder sitting, you know, about this big. Will they hit it? Yes, but you know, a bait that big is pretty big for them. But it's not to say they won't. But you know, you got to maximize your time and the probability. Look, you only got so much time, and for every single minute, every single second, you want your every cast to have the highest probability of one of those fish is going to win you some money. So I think you kind of focus down on that. I didn't talk about the underspins. So I would be throwing, look, these are just you know, owner flashy swimmers. You can throw these on a couple things. You can put it on the big plastics. You can put it on the small plastics. You know, and basically I've been throwing them early in the week and underspin. I got one of my rods, I just didn't pull it up there. But you can also just throw it, you know, on a, you know, something like this, a tiny little, you know, plastic, and put a smaller one on there and bring it through there. So look, I don't want to take too long, but I want to make sure I can get this report done. But look, I talked about the water, talked about the temperature, talked about you know, the lake kind of conditions on the lake. You know, there's grass, there's lily pads, but almost all the reed fishing, the fishing that was used to do, a lot of people used to do pitching and flipping in these reeds. Water was almost all out of these reeds, pretty much everywhere. So it just isn't, you know, there's no reeds to fish in. It's all going to be some other kind of grass fishing for you. So that's why the fish have kind of transitioned, I think, to some of this wood. And I've been targeting these brush piles. I've seen the fish piled up in it with my Garmin. I've caught a couple on them, and you know, I think it's probably what I would do. I would probably go shallow, just cover some water while it's dark, and you get that transition period, try to get a bite, and then have some very focused brush piles that look like they would produce. And you might have to just stick on them, you know, because there's going to be a lot of fishermen out here. So your ability to move around from one to one to one, to brush pile to brush pile to brush pile, you know, it might be limited, right? So you know, and be careful out there. Let me just say about the water. The water is down. Everyone, please be careful out there when you're running out here. There are a lot more stumps to hit. There's some stumps I'm seeing in some areas I haven't seen in a while. It's the first time the water's been this low, really, in a bit. And I'm seeing a lot of stumps in places where, you know, I run and, you know, maybe 20, 30 feet away from where I was running, now there's a stump there that I can see. So I know why I was being very specific, trying to stay on my line all the time that I've got. So make sure you're trying to do that, okay? Look, I don't know if I left anything out. I try to make it a pretty comprehensive report so you have a chance to kind of feel, you know, hear about what's going on with the lake right now, get you prepared for it. But I just want to wish everyone good luck on the tournament. I want to make sure everybody comes out and has a lot of fun. Let's consider the fact there's a lot of boats trying to fish a limited amount of water. So I guarantee somebody's going to cross paths and they're fishing. I can fish here and you can fish there type thing. So let's just always try to get along out there on the water. You know, bass fishing is a competitive sport, but it should be a sport where we don't have to argue over the water and argue about how we're going to get past you to get another spot to get to fish. So let's keep it civil out there on the lake, okay? So look, I'm Greg Hill from Fort Operating Base Lake Fork. I want to wish you the best luck this weekend during the Sealy tournament. And if I go over to the weigh-in, hopefully I'll get a chance to talk to some people. And if I see you out on the water, because I'll be out on the water too, kind of looking around and talking to people, I hope you guys have a great time and have a safe time. So good luck, everyone, and have a great weekend. GoPro, stop recording.